Hello and welcome to our fourth online class in Link Bible Institute's World Religions course this spring semester. Again, I am the director of the Link Bible Institute, Ken Chitwood, and this is our class from May 3rd, 2011. Tonight we're going to be covering Confucianism. And as we begin Confucianism, you might say, what is Confucianism? What do I know about Confucianism? Take a second to think if you've ever heard of Confucianism before. Maybe you studied it as a portion of Chinese history when you were in your world history class in elementary school or high school or even college. I know I remember doing a book report or a biography on Confucius and drawing him sitting and meditating in like a Chinese scholar's garden amidst a bunch of chaos and war around him. And there's a reason that I drew him like that back in 5th grade, as we'll learn this evening. I also think of running into a few of Confucius' sayings when I was in a Chinese scholar's garden in New Zealand. Some of you may have very well traveled to China. Maybe you interacted with Confucian philosophy, Confucian religion there. How many of you have ever been to a Chinese restaurant and taken a look at the fortune cookies, right? The fortune cookie sayings, or have you heard the Confucius says jokes? Oftentimes, this is what Confucianism is to the West. Stephen Prothero says it's as relevant as a fortune cookie, or he says, is Confucianism just a joke? If we're just going to laugh at all the Confucius says jokes, then is Confucianism a joke? And I think inherent in what Prothero is saying is that it's dangerous to think of that. It's not right to think of Confucianism as a joke or as simple as the lines on a fortune cookie, which we kind of laugh at and we kind of joke about quite often when we break them out of the little fortune cookie. For many, in fact for millions, billions of people in this world, Confucianism is the basis for how they live life, for how they interact with human beings, with how they hope to live as complete and full human beings. So to understand Confucianism is to understand billions of people and how they live their lives and how they hope to interact with you. Confucius is one of the most influential philosophic writers of all time because his writings form the basis of relationships and philosophy in most of East Asia. And it's not been universal over all times. It's not like Confucius just wrote it and everyone accepted it. There were competing schools. Eventually Confucianism came to the rise at some point in time in Chinese history, which you could read about in the chapter on Confucianism by Prothero. And it went through its ebbs and flows, its waxing and waning, and we'll learn a little bit more of that process as well, specifically as that happened in the 20th and 21st century. With no further ado, let's jump into Confucianism and start learning a little bit more about what Confucianism is all about. So we can answer this question of what do you know of Confucianism with a little more proficiency than maybe we did at the beginning of the lecture. Confucianism for Prothero is known as the way of propriety. If Islam is the way of submission and Christianity the way of salvation, then Confucianism is the way of propriety. Why is that? Well, for Confucianism, the problem is chaos or social disorder. The solution is social order, replacing that social disorder with social order. How do you do that? You do that through understanding ethics and practicing etiquette and ritual, and taking the ethics, the knowledge, into ritual action. The exemplar is a junzi, or a superior person. Confucius, of course, would be a great exemplar, but he's not necessarily the only exemplar. In fact, he would say of himself that he was just someone transmitting the truth. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Some people say that Confucianism isn't really a religion, it's just a philosophy. There's this discussion that's gone on, where's the dividing line between a religion and a philosophy? In Christianity, in the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas took Aristotelianism and converted it, baptized it, as it were, and kind of formed his Christian theology around Aristotelian philosophy. Christian theologians do this often. Other theologians of other religions do this as well. They take philosophies and deify it or amalgamate it within their own religious system. Integrate it, rather, would be a better word than amalgamate. But Confucianism doesn't really integrate philosophy as much into an existing religion as create a brand new philosophy. And some people say, well, Confucianism is a philosophy because it doesn't have any formal hierarchy like the Vatican, has no priesthood, has no real sacred spaces. Their temples are not meant for worship of any deity, and that's because there are no gods. Although they do have writings that they turn to, they are by no means considered inspired or written by divine fiat or communicated from the gods or mythic tales or anything like that. One thing you need to understand is the context of Confucius and where he was, starting to come up with this philosophy and where he was coming from when he did this. Why some people might think it's more of a philosophy than it is a religion. You see, before Confucius, Chinese thinkers were more likely to speak of heaven than earth. After Confucius, it was the other way around. So, to this day, Confucians are preoccupied with humans rather than gods, and with life before death rather than life after it. Their concerns are ethical rather than eschatological, practical rather than metaphysical. This is what Stephen Prothero says on page 106 of his text. Of course, Confucians do extend their obligations of ritual etiquette and like filial piety and ethics in relationship beyond the grave. They see their rituals with deceased ancestors as key expressions of harmony in relationship. So they do extend it beyond the grave. But what you might say is that Confucianism is a sacred humanism. Okay, so they kind of make being human a divine thing, and they make being divine very human. Confucius himself, again, he considered himself as a transmitter of ancient truths rather than an inventor of new ones. If you go down to the bottom point here, he's not considered a saint, he's not a miracle worker, he's not deified by Confucians, although some Taoists will deify him. He is simply seen as someone who passed on knowledge about how to live their life and how to live it in relationship with other people. In fact, this whole idea of combining the sacred and the secular is one that is done with Confucius as well. Again, he's not seen as divine, he's seen as human, but he's taken as communicating almost divine truths about humanity in his writings. His basic message was to become a junzi, or a superior person, is by learning to cultivate ren, or human-heartedness, and li, which is ritual, etiquettes, filial piety, and propriety with other people.